He was just trying to move out. Boxes stacked, truck ready, a new chapter of life waiting. But to her, the self-appointed watchdog of the neighborhood, his every step was a crime. Within minutes, her whispers turned into a call, and flashing lights followed. What should have been an ordinary moving day spiraled into humiliation, suspicion, and fear. But what she didn't know, what no one expected, was that her attempt to shame him would backfire in the most shocking way. Because sometimes, justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes, it shows up wearing a badge of its own. For years, Marcus had lived quietly in his suburban cul-de-sac. A Marine veteran, disciplined and proud, he carried himself with dignity. His neighbors knew him as polite, hard-working, and respectful. But some, like Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the Homeowners Association, saw him differently. She never spoke kindly, always watching, always questioning why he lived here. Now Marcus was moving out. His son had recently graduated the police academy, and Marcus was downsizing to a smaller home closer to family. That Saturday morning, he rented a moving truck, carefully loading boxes onto the driveway. Sweat on his brow, he stacked memories into cardboard, old uniforms, family albums, and tools he'd kept since his service days. The street was alive with normal weekend sounds, sprinklers ticking, children riding bikes, neighbors trimming hedges. But from across the street, Karen stood still, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She didn't see a man moving into a new chapter of his life. She saw suspicion where none existed. It started small. Her muttering, her pacing. Then the phone came out, dialing, whispering, watching. Marcus ignored her, too used to her antics. He thought she'd just ran into her phone and move on. But when the sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, a knot tightened in his chest. Something told him this wouldn't be just another move. The squad car turned into the cul-de-sac, red and blue lights reflecting off windows and garage doors. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their Saturday suddenly more interesting. Karen hurried toward the officers, waving her arms as though she had single-handedly prevented a crime. "There, that's him," she cried, pointing at Marcus. Her voice carried, sharp and self-righteous. "He's stealing. That's not his house. Look at the truck. He doesn't belong here." Marcus stood frozen by the moving truck. He knew this script. He'd lived it before in smaller ways. A store clerk tailing him down aisles, a neighbor clutching her purse when he walked by. But today it was louder, public, and humiliating. The officers approached with caution, hands hovering near their belts. "Sir, can we see some ID?" Marcus inhaled slowly, reaching carefully into his pocket, his movements deliberate, calm. Years of discipline reminded him. Sudden gestures could mean danger. He handed over his license, his eyes steady but heavy with disbelief. Karen stood triumphantly at the curb. "See, I told you. He doesn't live here. He's probably breaking in, stealing furniture." Her voice dripped with certainty, feeding the spectacle. One officer glanced at the license, then back at Marcus. The address matched. Everything was in order. Still, protocol demanded questions. "So you're moving out today?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. Been here 10 years. Just loading up to leave." Before the officer could respond, Karen interjected again, louder this time. "Don't believe him. People like him lie. He's dangerous. You can't just let him walk away." Each word was a dagger, twisting deeper into Marcus's dignity. The neighbors, once silent, now whispered. Some pulled out phones, recording. His life, his honor, his entire existence reduced to suspicion because of one woman's prejudice. The tension thickened. Officers, though professional, lingered longer than necessary, asking questions that Marcus had already answered. His heart pounded with the familiar ache of being seen as a suspect first, a man second. Then another sound cut through the air. A car pulling up, doors shutting, footsteps quick. Marcus's son, Jordan, had arrived to help with the move. Dressed in casual clothes, carrying a backpack, he approached the scene with confusion. "What's going on?" Jordan asked, scanning the flashing lights, the officers, and his father's stiff posture. Karen turned, her eyes lighting up with vindication. Another one. They're working together. Arrest him too. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They hadn't expected backup, not from her side, and certainly not from his. Marcus lowered his eyes, ashamed his son had to witness this. But Jordan's gaze sharpened, his jaw clenched. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his bag, pulling out not a box, not a tool, but his freshly issued police badge. Time froze. Jordan held the badge high, the gold catching the afternoon sun. His voice cut through the chaos, firm, commanding, and echoing with authority. Officer Jordan Williams, badge number 1743. That's my father you're detaining. The officer stiffened. Karen's smirk collapsed, her face twisting with disbelief. She stammered. Wow, what? No, you can't. This has to be fake. Jordan stepped closer, his presence towering not in size, but in resolve. He wasn't just a son now. He was the embodiment of justice she could no longer twist. I watched my father serve this country with honor. And today, I watched him get humiliated for existing on his own property. The neighbors leaned forward, their whispers silenced. Every eye in the cul-de-sac locked on the confrontation. Karen shrieked, pointing wildly. He's lying. They're both criminals. Arrest them now. But her words, once sharp enough to control a scene, now crumbled under the weight of truth. Jordan's badge gleamed undeniable. The officers exchanged a look, realization settling in. The man they questioned wasn't a suspect. He was a victim. The real disruption stood screaming before them. Jordan turned his eyes on Karen. You called in a false report. You tried to weaponize the system against my father. That's harassment. That's filing a false police call. Karen's face flushed red, her mouth opening but no words forming. The same authority she had once manipulated was now closing in on her. The moment cracked like thunder. The officers moved, not toward Marcus, but toward Karen. Hands guided her wrists behind her back. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed louder than any of her screams. For the first time, Marcus exhaled deeply, shoulders loosening. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. His dignity had carried him through too much to celebrate someone else's downfall. But his son had turned humiliation into justice. The cul-de-sac was quiet now, the flashing lights reflecting not on Marcus, but on Karen as she was escorted toward the squad car. Neighbors who once watched passively now whispered with a different tone, not suspicion, but shame. Some lowered their eyes, realizing silence had made them complicit for too long. Marcus stood still, hands resting on the last box he had been about to load. His son placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him, not as a rescuer, but as family. The officers, more cautious now, returned his license with an apology. But apologies could not erase the sting of what had unfolded. 10 years in that neighborhood, and in the end, he was treated as if he never belonged. As the squad car drove away, Karen shouting empty protests through the window, Marcus finally lifted the last box into the truck. The move continued, not just from one house to another, but from one chapter of life to the next. But the weight of the day lingered, because this story wasn't rare. For every Marcus, there are countless others, fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, whose dignity is questioned, whose existence is doubted, simply because of the color of their skin. The difference, this time, was that justice had a face. It wore a badge, not to intimidate, but to defend. It stood tall, not for power, but for family. And as Marcus closed the truck and turned the key, one question echoed louder than any siren, louder than any accusation. How many more fathers must endure humiliation before the world sees them for who they are? Not suspects, not intruders, but men who have given everything for the right to simply live in peace. If this story moved you, then be part of the conversation. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that shine a light on truth, justice, and the fight for dignity.